I wouldn't have thought you'd be the type to pack your own box, Elena.
Oh, you're funny, Draven. Just
I should be arresting Nikolai Draven, not fantasizing about him. I'm a detective in the organized crime division. He's the most dangerous mobster in the building where I live. Cold, arrogant, forbidden in every sense. I spent years trying to find evidence to destroy him. Then, one night, I stepped into the elevator carrying a box of files and thought I was alone. Without thinking, I let slip exactly what I should never have said. My dream was to be his. He's so hot. The low laugh came from behind me. Nikolai had heard every word, and from that moment on, my investigation stopped being just a hunt for the most dangerous criminal in Chicago. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1, The Box, the Elevator, and the Laugh. The Central Police Station in Chicago smelled of old paper and reheated coffee, and neither of those scents bothered me more than they should have. I'd been hunched over my desk for 11 hours, sorting through old reports of port traffic in Indiana Harbor, when Tessa O'Hara appeared, leaning against the partition with a mustard-colored folder in her hands and a smile I knew far too well to trust. The fluorescent light flickered in the corner of the room, the way it had been flickering for 3 months without anyone from maintenance showing up, and the air had that dryness typical of winter indoors, scratching the throat with every sip of cold coffee. "Voss," she said, tossing the folder onto my desk. "The back of your neck is red. I can see it from here. It's hot in here. It's snowing outside, honey. The station's heater can barely keep my feet warm. The back of your neck is red because of the hot billionaire in your building, and nobody in this room has the guts to say it to your face except me." I pushed my glasses up the bridge of my nose and pretended to keep reading. The lines danced across the yellowed paper, as if they'd taken on a life of their own. I'd been trying to ignore Nikolai Draven in reports for so long that his name already had a texture to it. It was no longer a word. It was a breath caught between two ribs, on the left side, exactly where I used to put my hand when I needed to remember to breathe deeply. "I'm investigating the man. Tessa, you're torturing yourself with the man, Voss, which is different." She pulled up a chair without asking, sat with her legs crossed, and watched me like someone waiting for milk to boil. Tessa was a forensic analyst, 30 years old, laughed loudly in the middle of ballistics work, and classified colleagues with culinary metaphors that nobody understood except her. She had chipped red polish on her thumb, and a huge mug with an embroidered cat that looked just as furious as its owner whenever someone messed with the communal microwave. "You're at the burnt corn mush stage, girl. Want some advice? No. Take those files home. Work in your pajamas. Get away from the station. We've got a leak, Voss. You know it. I knew it. That's why the box." I stood up without answering, grabbed the box of copies I'd set aside that morning myself, and covered the top with a black cardigan before heading down. It was 6 kilos of paper, maybe 7, weighing on my chest like a confession. The cardboard was cold against my fingertips, and the cardigan still carried the faint scent of my vanilla perfume, crumpled by the day. I crossed the hallway under Tessa's gaze, and she shouted after me, "Text me if the back of your neck catches fire." I didn't answer. The car's heater was dead. I drove the 18 minutes to the Gold Coast with white knuckles on the wheel and the box in the passenger seat, thinking, against my will, about who would be in the penthouse that night. Probably alone, probably reading, probably impeccable in that almost offensive way he had of filling any room. The streets gleamed wet under the traffic lights, the melted snow forming dark puddles at the intersections, and the left windshield wiper squeaked at steady intervals, marking the rhythm of my anxiety. I hated knowing that kind of detail about him. I hated having mentally logged that he drank his coffee black, that he headed down to the garage between 7:40 and 7:55, that he greeted the doorman with a nod and never with a word. I hated having noticed, last week, that the silver ring on his right hand had an initial in Cyrillic that I recognized before I even wanted to. I hated, above all, having realized that he held doors open for older women with a gentleness that didn't match the file I kept in the second drawer of my desk. I parked in my spot, picked up the box, and walked the 15 frozen meters to the garage elevator. The echo of my heels on the concrete was the only sound on the floor. The air smelled of oil, cold tires, and damp cement, and the yellow light from the bulbs hanging from the low ceiling cast long shadows that moved around my feet. I pressed the button with my elbow. The doors opened with a mechanical sigh. I stepped in without looking around. The elevator rose slowly, the way only Gold Coast elevators rise, as if they charged for each floor traveled in patience. The mirror at the back reflected a version of me I'd rather not face. Hair loose over my shoulders, purple shadows under my eyes, a wrinkled collar, the box pressed to my chest like armor. The glasses slipped down the tip of my nose. My hands ached. My shoulder burned from the weight of the box. And, exhausted as I was, not realizing what I was doing, not even realizing I had a mouth, I let it slip, in a murmur to myself. My dream was to be his. He's so hot. The elevator kept rising. For half a second, the world stayed normal. And then, behind me, came the laugh. Low, soft, slow, savoring every syllable. I felt the blood drain from my shoulders down to my feet in a physical rush, as if someone had opened a tap in my collarbones. I pressed the box to my chest until the cardboard creaked quietly between my arms. I didn't turn around right away. I couldn't. For a moment, I stared at the lit panel, the numbers rising one by one, and tried to convince my mind that maybe it was a hallucination. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was anything but the one thing it was. When I turned, it was slowly, like someone turning to confirm their own sentence. Nikolai Draven was in the corner of the elevator, leaning against the wall with the calm of someone who lives in silences, hands in the pockets of his charcoal gray overcoat. One foot crossed over the other, a discreet antique watch on his left wrist, partially covered by his sleeve, dark eyes resting on me with a curiosity that was, at the same time, amused and absolutely predatory. He smelled of something woody and expensive, a cologne that seemed to have been chosen to cling to other people's clothes without permission. He had heard every word, every one. I felt my face catch fire in a way that no station heater could ever explain. The glasses slipped a little further down. The box weighed as if it were full of lead, and I couldn't decide whether I wanted the elevator to fall, to stop, or to simply swallow the next 4 floors all at once. The panel marked the 6th floor. The 7th took an entire lifetime. "Good evening," he said. Just 2 words, but spoken in that low voice, with the faintest accent, with the patience of someone holding himself back from laughing again. His voice had the weight of something old, something practiced, and it resonated against the carpeted walls of the elevator as if the whole cubicle had been designed to amplify it. I opened my mouth, closed my mouth, opened it again. "Good evening." My voice came out 2 octaves above normal. He noticed, I saw him notice, the corner of his mouth rose 0.5 millimeter, and that, in a man like Nikolai Draven, was the equivalent of a public roar of laughter. The elevator stopped on the 8th floor. Mine. The doors opened with that discreet chime that suddenly seemed sadistic to me. I took a step forward. The box slipped in my arms. I readjusted it with my chin, lost my balance for 1/2 second, and my right heel caught on the door's threshold. I didn't fall. Almost. I recovered my footing with a clumsy maneuver that involved my shoulder hitting the hallway wall and the black cardigan slipping off the box onto the floor. The hallway smelled of waxed wood and lilies from the lobby florist, and the burgundy carpet muffled the sound of the fabric falling at my feet. Behind me, I heard the light sound of the fabric of his overcoat shifting. When I raised my eyes, Nikolai had his arm extended, holding the elevator door before it could close. The black cardigan hung from his hand, loose, folded haphazardly over his long fingers. He leaned over, without stepping out of the elevator, and held the fabric out toward me like someone returning a glove that had fallen at a ball from the last century. I took the cardigan with tingling fingers. I couldn't look at his face. I looked at the ring. Cyrillic initial, brushed silver. I knew what it was. I'd known for weeks. And there, standing in the hallway with the cardigan in my fist, what I felt was worse than shame. It was recognition. "Thank you," I murmured. He still hadn't let go of the door. He held the smile 0.5 millimeter. He held the gaze entirely. For a second, I thought he was going to say something else. Anything. And my chest tightened as if every beat of my heart now cost twice as much. And when he finally pulled his arm back, letting the door begin to close between us, he said, low, in the slowest voice I'd ever heard a man use, "Good evening, detective." The door closed. I stood there in the 8th floor hallway with the box in my arms, the cardigan hanging from my fist, my glasses crooked, and a buzzing rising up my temples as if someone had hung a bell inside my head. The elevator kept rising, taking him to the penthouse, and I followed the faint sound of the cable moving away inside the wall until the silence of the hallway swallowed everything again. Detective. I had never told him I was a cop. I had never shown a badge in the lobby, Never greeted the doorman by my rank. Never entered the building wearing a vest. That man shouldn't have known. That man shouldn't have even noticed I existed. I worked with the discretion of someone trained to go unnoticed in hallways far more dangerous than that one. But he knew. I leaned my back against my apartment door. The box slipped to the floor between my feet, with a muffled thud that seemed too loud in the silence of the floor. I closed my eyes. I tried to breathe. I couldn't. I tried to think. I couldn't. My hands were still trembling slightly, and I couldn't tell whether it was from the cold left over from the garage or the heat left over from his eyes. All I could hear, on a loop, inside my skull, was that low laugh rising from the corner of the elevator like smoke. And the only thing I was certain of in that moment was that I wouldn't sleep. Chapter 2: Detective Without a Badge. I didn't sleep. I spent the small hours lying on my side, glasses on the nightstand, staring at the bedroom ceiling as if it would answer for me. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the laugh. Every time I opened them, I heard the word, detective, 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 as if he had baptized me in the corner of that elevator and I could no longer get the name off my body. The sheets smelled of the vanilla soap I bought at the corner pharmacy, and yet I swore I could smell, in the finest layers on top, the remnant of cedar and leather that had stuck to my collar the night before. I got up at 5:30. I took a cold shower, the kind that hurts in the bones of your chest before it hurts in your head. I put on the white high-collared shirt, the gray coat, my hair pulled into the tightest bun I had. The glasses were the last thing. I stared at the bathroom mirror, fogged at the edges, the crooked tube of toothpaste on the sink, and the woman in there had purple shadows under her eyes and a mouth that was too thin, but she had posture. Posture still served. Posture had always served. I left the apartment determined not to use the elevator. I went down the 8 floors by the fire stairs, my breath tightening on the 3rd flight, the smell of old paint on the yellowed walls, and stubbornness holding out until the ground floor. I crossed the lobby without greeting the doorman, hearing my low heels strike sharply against the polished marble. I pushed the door to the street and the cold off Lake Michigan hit my face like a well-placed slap, frozen straight off the water, with that metallic touch Chicago has in February. The corner cafe was the only place within 2 blocks where I could get coffee without running into anyone who would recognize me from the station. I walked fast, shoes striking the packed snow, hands shoved in my coat pockets, the vapor of my breath rising in short columns, dissolving in the air before it reached the height of my face. I went in. The bell above the door rang, and the warmth of the machine wrapped around me, along with the sweet smell of freshly ground beans. I ordered black coffee, no sugar, medium cup. I sat at the back table, against the exposed brick wall, my back to the door, a tactical error from someone who'd slept 2 hours, and opened the black notebook where I scribbled loose observations, the kind that didn't make it into reports. The pen went cold in my fingers before it started to write. The bell above the door rang again. I didn't need to look. I felt it first. I can't explain it any other way. The air changed. The temperature changed. The way the girl at the counter shifted on her stool changed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with a care she hadn't shown any customer before this one. I kept my eyes on the notebook, wrote some random sentence just to avoid looking paralyzed, and heard when he said "low" to the guy at the machine, in the voice of someone who'd never had to repeat an order in his life, the same as that woman ordered. I froze. The sound of the milk pitcher continued. The ambient music, some lazy jazz piano, continued. The world continued. I just closed the notebook with a studied calm, aligned the pen with the edge of the cover, and raised my eyes. Nikolai Draven crossed the 5 meters of the cafe and sat at the table next to mine. Not at mine, at the next one. The difference was a matter of centimeters, and he knew it. The overcoat from the day before had been swapped for a lighter black coat, of heavy wool, the collar open to reveal a neck marked by the cold. The ring was still on the same finger. His gaze was more rested than mine, which was impressively unfair. "Do you sleep well, Mr. Draven?" The question came out before I could tame it. He tilted his head a millimeter, amused, and rested his elbow on the edge of the table. "I do. And you?" "Excellent. You lie well, detective." I gripped the cup against my fingers too tightly. The heat burned. I didn't pull back. I felt the thick porcelain pulsing against my palm, the steam rising to my chin, the bitter smell of coffee mixing with his scent, which insisted on reaching my table without leave. "I don't know where you got that word." "From the same place you got that line in the elevator." He drank his coffee slowly, without breaking his gaze. are from somewhere honest. I felt the back of my neck burn. The neck Tessa had warned me was red. I swallowed the coffee, scalded my tongue, and pretended I hadn't. Is there something specific you want from me? Or is it just a habit of sitting near women who didn't invite you? He laughed. Low, restrained, the same timbre as the night before, and I hated the way my stomach responded before my brain. And I wanted to see if you were more polite in the morning. And you're not. Good morning, Mr. Draven. I stood up. I tossed $2 of tip on the table, heard the coins clink against the dark wood. I left without looking back. I felt his gaze trail down my back to the door, patient like someone surveying a plot of land before buying it, and I forced myself not to walk faster, not to trip, not to drop anything. It was a small victory, the kind you count for yourself when no one else is applauding. At the station, the smell of reheated coffee, old paper, and floor disinfectant greeted me as always. Tessa appeared before noon, with machine coffee in a plastic cup, and the sharp gaze of someone who recognizes the signs from a kilometer away. Voss, don't start. You've got the posture of someone who slept 2 hours and ran into something dangerous on the way to the bakery. Tessa, tell me the edited version that I'll accept. I sighed. I leaned against my desk, feeling the cold edge press into my back through my coat. I said, without giving names, that I'd run into a neighbor I'd rather avoid. I said he'd been inconvenient. I said I'd been sharp. I didn't say the name. I didn't say the word. I didn't say the elevator. I didn't say the neighbor wore a signet ring and laughed like someone who can read a closed notebook. Tessa listened to me with her arms crossed, with the patience of someone waiting for the end of the movie just to find out who the killer is. Voss, she spoke slowly, chewing each syllable. You're at the burnt corn mush stage. You know that, right? I don't know what that means. It means if nobody takes you off the heat now, in a week, you'll be nothing but smoke. I didn't answer. I looked at the computer screen. I opened Nikolai Draven's file, closed it without reading, opened it again. His photo in the corner of the folder gave me back the same look that had crossed the cafe. Tessa noticed. Tessa noticed everything, but she had the tact, that time, to say nothing more. She just put her hand on my shoulder, a brief, warm wait, and went back to the lab, trailing the smell of bad coffee. I worked late. I spent the afternoon on the port traffic report, my eyes burning and the fluorescent light buzzing above my desk. I turned down 2 coffees, 3 conversations, and a dinner proposal from the chief. I left the station after 9 town, my coat buttoned up to my neck, and drove back to the Gold Coast under fine snow that streaked the windshield diagonally, melting before the wiper even reached it. I parked in my spot. I walked the 15 meters of garage concrete, hearing the echo of my own steps strike the gray walls. I pressed the elevator button with my elbow, out of habit, even though this time I had no box in my arms. The doors opened. He was inside, leaning in the same corner, hands in his pockets the same way, eyes on my face before I even took the first step, as if he'd been there for hours just waiting for that moment. For half a second, I considered backing off, waiting for the next one, taking the stairs. I considered it seriously. I stepped in. I pressed the 8th floor with calculated calm and went to the opposite side from him, leaning against the elevator wall with the posture of someone standing in a courtroom. I looked at the panel. The panel had no answers. The panel had numbers, and the numbers lit up one by one with a cruel slowness. He held the door before it closed. Forget something, Mr. Draven. No. He let go of the door calmly. And I just wondered if you were coming tonight without a heavy box. And you are. Is there a reason you're keeping count of my boxes? He turned his face toward me, slowly, as if the question deserved all that time of breathing before the answer. Is there a reason you're keeping count of mine? I felt the blood rise to my ears. I clenched my jaw. I held the gaze. He looked me over from head to toe, in no hurry, from my shoes wet with ice up to the closed collar of my coat, and returned his eyes to mine with that calm that was the most provocative thing he had in his whole body. You're investigating the wrong man, detective. The elevator jolted for half a second on the 5th floor and resumed. I didn't blink. I felt the wall behind me tremble minimally, and for an instant the smell of cedar came again. Closer, fuller, harder to ignore. Excuse me. You heard me. I heard you, but I'd like to hear it again, with more detail. He smiled at the corner, in that way that wasn't a full smile, was just the promise of one. The doors opened on the 8th floor with the low chime of the signal. Good evening, detective. Mr. Draven, good evening. He didn't step out. I was the one who had to. I stepped out with heavy legs, stiff shoulders, my glasses firm on my face. I I stood in the hallway watching the door close between us for the second night in a row, and this time what he'd left behind wasn't a word. It was an entire sentence. I was investigating the wrong man. I walked to the apartment without touching the walls, with the steadiest stride I could put together, and only when the door closed behind me did I let the air out all at once. The buzzing came back in the middle of the living room, standing, with no support. It wasn't just desire. It was the possibility that he knew something about my work that I myself didn't know. Something about my files. Something about the boxes I carried home when no one was watching. I took the phone out of my pocket. My fingers trembled a little, and I lied to myself that it was the cold of the hallway. I opened the parallel file, the one I kept without anyone at the station knowing, hidden in a folder named after a cake recipe, with my father's name engraved at the top in capital letters. Detective Arthur Voss. I looked at the name for a length of time I couldn't measure. The letters seemed larger than the last time, heavier, older, and for the first time in a long while, I considered that maybe I'd been asking the wrong question. Chapter 3. Failed Operation, Unexpected Salvation. 3 days later, on Friday night, I was in stiletto heels for the first time in 2 years and wanted to shoot whoever invented that kind of footwear. The black dress hugged my waist in a way I'd never allow off-duty, the neckline plunged deeper than I'd mentally authorized, and the microphone was sewn inside the hem, the thin wire scraping the seam against my hip with every movement, reminding me at each step that I wasn't myself that night. The Draven Boutique Casino occupied the top floor of an old building in the Loop, low chandeliers of amber crystal, a green card table with individual lamps hanging on short cords, the whisper of chips sliding between manicured fingers, expensive perfume soaked into the velvet of the armchairs, the taste of the sweet smoke of old cigars at the back of the throat. I went in as a customer, alone, a clean credit card under a fake name, a smile rehearsed for hours in the mirror of the station bathroom. "You're in position." Captain Daniel Reyes's voice came embedded in my ear, my direct superior, fatherly on the surface, hands always heavy on the shoulder of whoever he wanted to control. "Remember, Voss, just record. Don't improvise." "Noted," I murmured, pretending to check my lipstick in the bar mirror, where my own image gave me back a woman I didn't recognize. I crossed the floor, collected chips, sat at the roulette. The men I needed to record were 3 tables ahead, 2 Russians in poorly cut suits talking low about names I knew by heart from reports. I tilted my hip in their direction, slow, letting the neckline deliver the work my discipline never would. The croupier spun the wheel. The little white ball whirled in a hypnotic rhythm, and for a second I wished I were anywhere else in the world. It worked for 7 minutes. On the 8th, the microphone failed. I felt a dry click at the spot, then a thick silence in the feedback. No hiss, no background, the sign that the transmission had dropped. I tried to cough, tried to ask for confirmation. Nothing. And it was exactly in that second that one of the Russians slowly turned his head and fixed his gaze on me as if he'd just recognized an animal out of its habitat. I stood up unhurried. I walked to the service hallway pretending to look for the bathroom, my heel scraping the marble floor in a click that seemed to give away every step. Behind me, 2 sets of footsteps, heavy, synchronized. I pushed through the double doors and entered a narrow service hallway, walls of grimy white tile, a fluorescent light flickering with a low buzz, the smell of industrial detergent mixed with something metallic I preferred not to name. No radio, no backup, no weapon, because the dress didn't allow for a holster. I put my hand against the wall and calculated. 4 meters to the fire exit, 3 if I ran, 2 if I took off my heels. I took off the heels. The floor froze the soles of my feet in a jolt. The door behind me opened before I could take the first step. One of the Russians came in first, smiling in a way that wasn't a smile. The second locked the door with his hip. "Good evening, ma'am," said the first, in English full of rough edges. "Wrong table, wrong bathroom," I corrected, keeping my voice firm despite the ice in my chest. "I'm already leaving." He took a step. I took one back. My back hit cold metal, a service door I hadn't seen. The second Russian pulled something from the inner pocket of his jacket, and I was already calculating the angle of the heel in my right hand as an improvised weapon, deciding which eye to aim for first, when the door behind me opened on its own. Not behind me, beside me. A gigantic body entered the hallway without making a sound, which was strange in a man that size. Nearly 2 meters tall, shoulders too broad for the doorframe, shaved head, eyes pale like bottle glass washed for years in the sea. He looked at the 2 Russians, then at me, then at the 2 Russians again. Total time. 3 seconds. The boss asked, he said, in a voice so low it seemed to scrape the tile. The Russians exchanged glances. One of them started a sentence in Russian. Guttural, hurried. The giant didn't respond. He just advanced 1 step, and the 2 of them backed up too. It was Yuri Bear Pavlovich. I knew his name by heart from reports too. Nikolai's personal security, ex-Spetsnaz, 3 words a day according to the sources. The sources were right. Ma'am, Bear turned to me, without changing his tone. With me, it wasn't a request. I took the heel in my hand, followed the giant through a service hallway, a narrow stairway that smelled of damp cement, a steel door with a panic bar, a private garage in the bluish light of neon. A black armored car waited with its engine running, vapor coming out of the exhaust against the frozen concrete. Bear opened the back door with the incongruous gentleness of a butler. I got in without asking, because the alternative was going back to the hallway. The door closed with that dense sound of a reinforced car. The car took off, and only then did I realize I wasn't alone in the back seat. Nikolai Draven was seated on the other side, his dark wool coat open, the collar of his white shirt loose at the first button, the brushed silver ring on his right ring finger glinting slowly as he turned his wrist. A steel lighter passed between his fingers in a slow, automatic motion, like a private rosary, and the Cyrillic inscription I had catalogued in 3 different reports turned toward my side with each turn, as if he knew exactly the angle at which that word cut deepest. He didn't look at me right away. He looked at my hand, still closed around the stiletto heel. Creative weapon, he commented, his voice low. Amused. Detective? Don't call me that here. Here is the safest place in Chicago for me to call you that. I rested the heel on my lap. I clenched the fabric of the dress between my fingers to have something to clench that wasn't his neck. The car glided down Lakeshore Drive, thick snow beginning to fall on the windshield, headlights of passing cars flashing in sequence, the heating whispering in a warm hum that contrasted with the ice that still lived inside my chest. Call, where are we going? To a place where you can take off that dress without anyone killing you. He finally turned his head, and his gaze grazed mine. I said, take off. I didn't say anything more. I didn't say anything either. I shot back, feeling the blood rise to the roots of my hair. But I'll say it now. Stop the car. No. Stop the car, Draven. Detective. His voice stayed low, without rising a millimeter. And precisely because of that, it weighed more. You were handed over. If I drop you on the street now, you won't make it home. I wanted to say it was a lie. I couldn't. The microphone had failed exactly in the second the Russians identified me, and that wasn't an operational coincidence. It was choreography. Every beat, every pause, every camera turned the wrong way. I shut my mouth. I looked out the window. The snow thickened, and the flakes struck the glass like small hands asking to come in. 20 minutes later, the car entered the underground garage of the Gold Coast. My building. Bear parked near an elevator I'd never seen. A private elevator. No buttons. No panel. Set into a wall of black marble I'd always taken for decoration. Nikolai put his hand on a reader hidden in the wall, and the door opened without a sound. Ma'am. Bear held the door. Get in. I got in. Nikolai stepped in behind me. The door closed. The elevator rose so slowly that I could count 3 beats of my own heart before the discreet chime sounded at the top. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor. Double-height ceilings, glass walls from floor to ceiling, a lit stone fireplace crackling slowly, books in 3 languages stacked on the low table, the smell of burning wood mixed with something citrusy that must have been his soap. I'd imagined the place 1,000 times in reports. Never so quiet, never so much his. In coat, Nikolai said, offering a wool overcoat over his arm. High collar, knee length. For the terrace. I'm fine. You're barefoot holding a stiletto heel, with a burned-out microphone sewn into the hem of a dress worth more than the rent on my first house. You're not fine, detective. Take the coat. I took the coat. The fabric was heavy, still warm from the heat of the room, and it carried his scent so close that my breath caught for half a second, before I remembered to keep breathing. I put it on over the dress. Nikolai slid open the door to the terrace, and the wind off Lake Michigan came in like a clean knife. The terrace stretched out in dark stone, with tall pots left empty for the winter, a granite parapet up to the waist, and the whole city open down below, buildings lighting up one by one, snow drifting slowly against the yellow lights of the Michigan Avenue lamps. I crossed to the parapet. I rested both hands on it. I breathed. The frozen air burned in the depths of my lungs and gave me back something resembling clarity. He came up behind me, unhurried. He stopped at my side, a hand's breadth away. He didn't touch me. Who handed me over? I asked, without looking at him. Someone from your house. Name. I don't give names for free. I turned my face. He was looking straight ahead, his profile cut by the warm light of the hall at his back, vapor coming out of his breath slowly, forming a small cloud that dissolved before it could come near mine. What do you want in exchange? For you to stop investigating me for the wrong reasons. I don't investigate for the wrong reasons. You do. He finally turned. His eyes were dark and calm in a way that stirred some inner bone of mine, some old place I hadn't revisited in years. You investigate because they told you to investigate. Ask yourself one of these days who told you to. I gripped my fingers on the granite. The cold burned, and I was grateful for the cold, because it was the only thing reminding me that I still had a body. Who handed me over, Draven? I'll give you the name when you're ready to hear it. I'm ready now. You're not. He slowly reached out and took a snowflake from my hair with the tips of 2 fingers, without touching my skin, and even so I swore I felt his warmth millimeters from my temple. You still think the world is divided between us and you. I had the answer ready. My mouth opened. The answer didn't come out, because he was too close, and my hand, the absolute traitor of my entire career, let go of the granite for an instant before my brain reminded me who I was and what I was wearing. I put my hand back on the stone. The granite had warmed where I'd gripped it. Nikolai noticed. He didn't comment. He just drew the 2 fingers away from my hair, slowly, like someone closing a glass door so as not to shatter it. And go back inside, detective, he said, his voice lower than before, almost an echo of the wind. I'll have Bear take you home. I'll walk. You'll go with Bear. I went back inside. I took off the coat. I returned it draped over his arm without touching his fingers. And even that non-approach cost me more discipline than 2 years of academy combined. I crossed the room, took the private elevator, went down with Bear silent at my side, holding my heel as if it were evidence at a crime scene. I stepped out into the garage with my head held high and my whole body trembling on the inside. Bear dropped me at the door to my floor. He said a single word before closing the elevator door. Sleep. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in the dress, the burned-out microphone hanging from the hem like a piece of cheap jewelry. I looked through the glass at the snow falling over Chicago and thought about everything he had said and everything I hadn't answered. I thought of Captain Reyes squeezing my shoulder before the operation, saying, "Be careful, kid," in that low voice that had always sounded safe and that now, in retrospect, sounded rehearsed. I thought of his voice on the radio, of the exact order in which the microphone had failed, of the precise second the Russian had turned his head. There was no possible coincidence there. There was only a name I still wasn't ready to hear. I fell asleep without realizing it, leaning against the headboard, glasses in my lap, the dress crumpled in the folds of my legs. The phone rang at 5:47. It was Tessa. Her voice was flat for the first time in all the years I'd known her. "Voss, you need to open the door, now." "What happened?" "Internal Affairs is in your building's lobby, heading up." Chapter 4. The Fall in 15 Minutes. I opened the door in sweatpants and an old FBI t-shirt, my glasses crooked, my hair pulled into a bun that looked more like a warning than a hairstyle. 3 Internal Affairs agents came in without greeting, black jackets dripping melted snow onto the wood floor. Behind them, Captain Reyes, a black knee-length coat, the expression of a father who'd come to deliver bad news at the hospital. The smell of reheated coffee from my kitchen died the second they crossed the threshold. Detective Voss. He touched my shoulder. The hand weighed as always. Maybe more. Search warrant. Cooperate, kid. It'll be easier for everyone. Warrant for what? Suspicion of a leak. Operation Draven. Friday night. I stood in the middle of the room while the 3 agents opened drawers, flipped mattresses, dismantled the coffee table with the professional calm of people who already knew where to look. It took 15 minutes. I timed it by the digital clock on the microwave, watching the green digits blink in silence while my life collapsed. 15 minutes between their arrival and the moment the youngest agent moved the bookshelf, as if he already knew the exact angle, opened a compartment in the wall behind it, and pulled out a black leather envelope I had never put there. I memorized his face. That man came in here knowing where to look, and no search warrant teaches an exact angle. He opened the envelope in front of me, slowly, ritualistically. Bundles of $100 bills, organized in tense rows, bound with new rubber bands. 80,000, I would later learn. In that second, I only saw green, A wall of green with the sweet smell of paper money. "It's not mine," I said. "Of course not," Reyes replied, his voice low, fatherly, devastating. "It never is." They took my backup phone from the nightstand drawer, the device I barely used, bought for emergencies. They opened it in front of me. Messages exchanged with an unidentified number, marked with times that matched exactly each movement of the failed operation. I read the words and they weren't mine, but they were there, inside my device, in my digital handwriting, with my emojis, with my lazy punctuation, typical of someone typing in a hurry. I never sent that. "Detective," Reyes squeezed my shoulder once more, and the touch was so familiar that it hurt more than if it had been violent. "Come with us. Please." I went. The interrogation room at the central station was the same one where I had already broken half a dozen men. A metal chair freezing against my thighs, a scratched Formica table, a fake mirror that gave back a pale version of myself, a yellow light buzzing on the ceiling. I sat on the wrong side for the first time in my life. Reyes sat across from me, opened a yellow cardboard folder, and asked all the right questions in the gentlest voice he had in his inventory. I answered nothing but my name. 4 hours later, badge on the table, gun on the table, service ID on the table, immediate suspension. Reyes signed the document in front of me, with the same blue ink pen he had lent me to sign my first report, 12 years earlier. The click of the cap sounded in the silence like a door closing. "Go home, kid," he said. "Rest. It'll all work out." I left. I got to the apartment after noon. No badge, no gun, no working car. Mine had been seized in the station garage. I climbed on foot from the lobby up to the 8th floor, without looking at anyone in the elevator, without looking at the hall camera, feeling the cold of the marble rise through the thin soles of my sneakers. I opened the door. The apartment was turned upside down. Books on the floor, spines turned up like dead animals, the couch torn open, white stuffing spilling from the cuts, the mattress off the frame, leaning crooked against the wall, the kitchen dishes stacked in the sink in a tower so crude it seemed designed to mock me. I closed the door. I rested my forehead against the cold wood. I took off my glasses. I held the glasses with both hands, feeling the warm metal of the temples against my palm, and I sat on the floor. It wasn't a movement. It was a silent collapse, knees slowly bending until my back hit the door. I pressed the glasses to my chest as if they were the only thing of mine that was left. I looked at the wreckage of the bedroom down the hallway, my grandmother's blanket thrown on the floor like a rag. I thought of my father, of the department, of 12 years of impeccable reports, of the family photograph that was somewhere in that chaos. I cried. For the first time in a long while, I cried without method, without restraint, without discipline, without pretending it was anything else. Hot tears running down my chin, shoulders trembling against the door. A low sob caught in my chest like a cough. The doorbell rang. It was Tessa. She came in without asking permission, cheap wine under her arm, 2 plastic cups in her other hand, cursing Captain Reyes in 4.5 languages. She sat on the floor beside me, leaned her shoulder against mine with that firm weight of a friend who'd come to stay, opened the wine with a screwdriver she pulled from her lab bag. Voss. She handed me a cup. Drink. I drank. It was awful. Sweet. Warm. With a taste of plastic. He planted it. I know. He called me kid while he planted it. I know. Tessa rested her head on my shoulder, her short hair smelling of lab disinfectant. Give me one night. Tomorrow we take that bastard down. She stayed 2 hours. She washed the cups. She picked up 3 photographs from the floor and gave them back to me without comment, with that brusque way she had of taking care of people without letting them notice. She left promising to come back in the morning with coffee and fury. When the door closed behind her, the silence that remained was the worst kind of silence. The silence that comes after someone strong leaves and takes the pretend normalcy with them. I stood up. I started stacking books, cover by cover, as if organizing that would organize what was left of me. I was on the 3rd little pile when the door knocked again. I opened it without asking. I knew. Nikolai was in the hallway, a dark wool overcoat to mid-thigh, the collar of his white shirt open at the neck, his hair dusted with snow melting into shining strands. He had a leather case in his right hand, the stitching visible, the leather darkened by use. Detective. No. Detective. I'm not one anymore. He came in without being invited. He closed the door behind him with his heel. He looked at the wreckage of the living room without comment, crossed to the overturned dining table, righted it with one hand, and set the case on top of the scratched wood. Sit, he said. This is my house. I know. Sit. I sat. He pulled the other chair, turned it backward, and sat resting his arms on the backrest, the leather case between us like an altar table. What's in there? Everything. He opened it. Documents yellowed at the edges, surveillance photographs in black and white, statements with columns highlighted in yellow marker, a list of officers with parallel payments, amounts and dates in cramped handwriting. Reyes at the top, and 2 more names I recognized from the division, 2 men who called me by my nickname in the hallways. Just below, a name in capital letters, Victor Kale, age, old photographs, a network of front companies, accounts in the Caribbean, ties to prosecutors and judges. I flipped through slowly. My hands didn't tremble. My chest did. In a high pulse I felt in my jaw. And you had this the whole time. I've had this for 5 years. And you didn't hand it over. I handed it over 3 times. He spoke low, without defending himself, with that measured voice that was worse than any shout, to 3 different people at the department. The 3 of them died within 6 months. The last one was your father, detective. I raised my eyes from the case so slowly that it hurt the back of my neck. He turned the last page. It was an enlarged copy of an internal department report, the heading crossed out in red, dated 12 years earlier. Detective Arthur Voss, Operation 14B, closed. Below, 3 pages I had never been able to access officially, with names, times, direct orders, and in the footer, an internal authorization stamp with the initials V, K, in faded red ink, the same code that appeared, I knew from old reports, in orders that came out of Victor's circle without his ever putting his own name on paper. 12 years. 12 years without an answer. 12 years with a parallel file growing in my drawer. 12 years defending a system that had ordered the killing of the man who taught me to tie my shoes, who taught me to ride a bike, who carried me on his shoulder when I fell asleep on the couch. I didn't cry. I thought I was going to cry. I didn't cry. Something colder happened. An inner break that reorganized itself in silence. A gear that locked and came loose in the same breath. I felt the blood drain from my eyes to my stomach as if someone had turned over an hourglass inside me. I closed the case. I rested both hands on top of it. What do you want in exchange for this, Draven? My voice came out deader than I expected. He heard the death in my voice. He took half a second longer before answering, and in that half second I saw something cross his face that I couldn't name, only that you stay alive long enough to use it. I looked at him, hair damp with snow, the silver ring gleaming in the low light of the lamp that had survived the search, his right hand resting on the back of the turned chair. Long, still fingers. He wasn't offering me an alliance. He wasn't asking for anything. He was giving me back 12 years of a life I didn't know had been stolen. You knew who I was the night of the elevator. I knew. You laughed anyway. I laughed because it was the first time in years someone said something true near me, even without meaning to. I gripped the case between my fingers. Outside, the snow fell over Chicago, slowly, white, indifferent, tapping lightly against the window pane as if it too wanted to come in. I don't become an accomplice. I spoke firmly, looking into his eyes, not looking away even when the silence began to weigh. I don't work for you. I don't clean you up. I don't forgive you. I don't promise you absolutely anything. I didn't ask for any of that. But I take Victor Kale down with you. I make an investigative deal. I finish my father's work. After that, I decide what I do with you. Nikolai slowly rested his forehead on his forearm, folded over the backrest. He stayed like that for 3 seconds. And 3 seconds with that man in silence was more intimate than anything I had ever experienced. When he raised his head, there was something in his eyes I had never seen in any surveillance photograph. Something that resembled, dangerously, relief. Deal, detective, deal. He stood up. He took the case. He set it on the table again, like someone handing over a key. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the handle. Get your things, he said, without turning. You don't sleep here tonight. This apartment was made to be searched, and the next time it won't be internal affairs. Where do I go? With me. I stood in the middle of the destroyed room, the leather case on the crooked table, my glasses still in my left hand. I looked at the half-open door. Through the hallway beyond it, I saw his silhouette waiting for the elevator, broad back against the light of the hall, hands in the pockets of his overcoat, the patience of someone who knows that no one refuses shelter on a night when they've lost their own ground. I grabbed a backpack from the overturned closet. I threw inside 3 pieces of clothing rolled up carelessly. My father's parallel file that I kept in a gray folder behind the heater, the photograph Tessa had picked up off the floor, the spare glasses in the velvet case, and the leather case on top of everything. I closed the door without locking it. There was no point in locking it anymore. I walked down the hallway in my socks to the elevator where he waited. The beige carpet brushed against the soles of my feet. I stepped in. The door closed with that mechanical sigh I had heard 1,000 times. He pressed the penthouse button without touching me, but his arm passed close enough for me to smell the wet wool and something woody beneath it. We rose in silence. The floor numbers lit up one by one, small red dots in a row that seemed shorter than it should have been. And when the elevator passed my old 8th floor, I thought, without saying it, that maybe it had taken me 12 years to understand the only question that mattered. Who told me to investigate the wrong man? Chapter 5. A Cold-Blooded Deal. The penthouse had the wrong silence. I woke up on Monday, in the guest room of Nikolai's penthouse, with the gray light of Chicago hitting the curtain and the strange sensation of sleeping inside the territory of the man I should be arresting. The sheets smelled of clean cotton and a discreet cologne, woody, that seemed to have been chosen to not draw attention, and drew it anyway. The leather case he had handed me the night before sat on the nightstand, closed, as if it were an animal that might wake before me. Inside, my father's name. 12 years turned into 4 pages stapled together with a tampered evidence label. I put on the same pants from the day before, pinned my hair up with the clip I'd left in the bathroom, and went to the kitchen without making noise. The dark wood floor was cold under my bare feet, and every half-open door in the hallway seemed to test my curiosity. Nikolai was already up, leaning against the black marble counter, reading something on his phone with the patience of someone who hadn't slept in days. The white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, exposed a forearm marked by a thin scar I hadn't seen before. When he saw me, he slid a cup in my direction, half a spoon of sugar, stirred slowly. I hadn't said how I liked it. He just knew. "Good morning, detective." "I'm not a detective anymore," I replied, holding the cup with both hands to hide that they were trembling. "You are until someone convinces you otherwise." He shrugged, the gesture absurdly elegant for someone who had slept 4 hours. "And I'm not going to be that someone. That was our deal." In one sentence, I wouldn't become an accomplice. He wouldn't try to turn me into anything other than the woman who had barged into his elevator with a heavy box and a loose mouth. I drank the coffee slowly, feeling the warm bitterness go down and soften the hard knot I'd had since the small hours. Outside, the lake pretended to be scenery. "I want access," I said. "Everything I need to cross-reference with the station's records. Passwords, shell accounts, transfers, the names you have, and I don't." Nikolai watched me for a moment too long before answering. He set his phone on the counter with the care of someone who didn't want to make noise inside my head. When he looked at me like that, I remembered with an offensive clarity his laugh in the elevator, low, patient, as if he'd already won the match before I even knew we were playing. "Lev arrives in 20 minutes, he said, finally. "He'll bring the casino files. Tomorrow afternoon, we go to the port. At night, you cross-reference everything with what your friend gets from the dead archive. Tessa isn't just anyone." "I know." He turned his face to the window. "That's why she'll get it." Lev Marinov arrived exactly 20 minutes later, as promised. Gray hair, charcoal gray suit, a leather case identical to the one Nikolai had handed me at the apartment. The consigliere shook my hand with the precision of a former prosecutor who knew exactly how long a handshake could last before becoming a statement. He sat at the dining table as if it were a courtroom and opened 3 folders in sequence, aligning the edges with a symmetry that bordered on ritual. "Mrs. Voss," he said, without smiling, "Mr. Draven instructed me to provide everything you request. I want you to know I'm against this decision. And that, even so, I'll carry it out with integrity." "Appreciated," I replied. "It's not praise. It's a record." He finally raised his eyes to me, and what was in them wasn't hostility. It was assessment. The gaze of someone sizing up a hostile witness before the interrogation. "You understand, I hope, that I've already seen 3 people in your position. 2 are dead. The 3rd preferred to disappear in Canada. I don't say this to threaten. I say it so you understand why I prefer a written record to verbal trust." "I understand perfectly, Mr. Marinov." "Excellent." He went back to the papers. "Then we can work." I almost laughed. Almost. Tessa opened a video window on the laptop Lev placed in front of me, and her face appeared next to a ballistic shelf with a mug reading "Coffee as evidence." Behind her, 3 dead archive boxes stacked, the yellowed labels written by hand. "Voss, the gentleman in the tie. There looks like he prays in Latin. Trustworthy." Lev didn't raise his eyes from the folder. He just turned another page, with his usual symmetrical care, and let the silence answer for him. Focus, people. Tessa opened the first box in front of the camera, pulling out a grimy folder. Operation 14B, Dead Archive, Shelf 7, behind the shelving nobody's reviewed in 8 years. I had to bribe the archivist with pizza to let me through. There are 3 things here that'll turn your stomach, Voss. First, your father's casualty report was signed in duplicate, 2 different dates, same hand. Second, Reyes's name appears as a field officer on the operation, but he swore in an internal hearing that he was on duty at Central Command. Third, and this one's the gift, the name of the telecommunications analyst who crossed paths with me yesterday appears here too. 12 years ago, same division. I leaned back in the chair. Lev stopped turning pages. For the first time all morning, he raised his eyes. Send it scanned, I said. Everything. It's already in your secure email. Tessa winked. And Voss, be careful with this, Lev. A man who arranges a folder by symmetry kills by symmetry too. Professionalism, Lev replied, without looking at the camera, is not a flaw. Tessa laughed. I let that go, because for the first time in 3 days I had what I needed. We spent all of Monday cross-referencing data. The table turned into a minefield of printed spreadsheets, statements with passages underlined in yellow, and empty mugs no one bothered to clear. I slept 4 hours in the guest room, the laptop still open in the sheets. 3 corrupt officers appeared in a pattern. Deposits too small to be bribes, too regular to be coincidence. Reyes was one of them. The second, a sergeant in the narcotics division. The third, a telecommunications analyst who had access to the wiretaps. The 3 of them fed a knot that descended into a front company in Wilmington, and from that company into 2 offshore accounts with the same opening signature. Victor Kale. He wasn't anywhere in large letters. He was in the margins, in the scribbles, in the headers where no one looks. That's how men of that type survived, writing in the footer. On Tuesday afternoon, we went to the private port of Indiana Harbor. Bear drove. I sat in the back, next to Nikolai, with the case on my lap, and pretended not to notice that his knee touched mine now and then when the road curved. Each touch lasted a fraction of a second longer than the asphalt justified, and neither of us commented, because commenting would require admitting that we had noticed. The port smelled of oil, iron, and frozen air coming off the lake. Red containers lined up like dominoes, cranes standing still against the gray sky, and the almost reverent silence of an operation that knew how to function without fanfare. Gulls circled high, without squawking, as if even they had learned to respect that place. Lev showed me the cargo manifests, the legitimate ones and the others. He hid nothing. I hadn't decided yet what I would do with what I was seeing, and he knew it. And even so, he handed it over. At night, Bear brought me a steaming mug while I worked seated on a container turned into a table. Chamomile. He set it in front of me like someone laying a weapon on the counter of a police station. Drink, he said. Pause. Before cold. Thank you, Bear. He looked at me 3 seconds longer than necessary. Then he added, with the same face of someone reading an obituary, alive. I laughed, unintentionally. For the first time in 4 days, the sound came out hoarse, a bit rusty, as if my throat had forgotten the way. Bear seemed as satisfied as if he'd defused a bomb, and left, tying his scarf on the way. On the other side of the container, Nikolai watched, discreet, leaning against an iron pillar with his hands in his pockets, exactly like that night in the corner of the elevator. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. Neither did I. But I went back to the manifest, because a manifest didn't require courage. The small hours of Wednesday caught me barefoot on the penthouse terrace. I had woken at 3-something for no reason, the way you wake when your body knows things before your head does. I put the cardigan over my sleep shirt and went to the glass door. The metal of the handle burned cold in my palm. Nikolai was out there, standing against the parapet, with an unlit cigarette between his fingers, as if he'd forgotten to light it or decided not to. Insomnia? I asked, stopping beside him. Habit. The wind cut, slid down my neck and drove thin needles inside the fabric of the cardigan. Chicago spread its lights down below as if the city didn't know that within it were men deciding what would be left of each of us by the end of the week. I rested my hands on the parapet. His were a few centimeters from mine. I didn't move. Neither did he. Tomorrow I hand over the dossier, I said. State Internal Affairs. Out of Reyes's reach. Thursday afternoon. He took a while to answer. When he answered, it was lower than the wind. They'll try to kill you before that. I know. His fingers touched mine for 2 seconds. The cold of the parapet metal mixed with the warmth of his skin. I closed my eyes. I felt the air stop between my ribs, as if breathing were a political decision. I didn't pull back. I pulled back afterward, when the second turned to 3, and 3 would turn into something with another name. I withdrew my hand. I put it in the pocket of the cardigan. I looked at him. Don't protect me with your body, Nikolai. Protect me with the truth. He slowly turned his face to me. I'm going to do both, detective. His laugh didn't come, but the silence that took its place was worse, because I recognized in it the same promise he had kept in the corner of the elevator that night, before I understood the size of the mistake it would be to love him. I went back to the guest room bed without sleeping until dawn. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the antique clock in the hallway cut the silence with beats too regular. When the sky finally began to brighten, I had already memorized the root of the dossier by heart. State Internal Affairs, Room 412, file it directly into the hands of Prosecutor Halloran. 4 in the afternoon. No stops. No warning. I left the room dressed to pretend it was an ordinary day. First, I opened the drawer of the guest room dresser where Bear had left the .38 caliber backup gun 2 days earlier, with 2 extra magazines and a dark leather ankle holster. I strapped the holster inside my right boot, adjusted the cuff of my pants over it. The weight was small, familiar, and it was the first thing of the day that gave me back something resembling identity. Nikolai waited for me at the door of the penthouse elevator, coat over his arm, asking nothing. Bear, behind him, with his usual closed face. Lev, further back still, with the leather case under his arm. You're not coming with me, I said. Bear takes you to the corner of the station, Nikolai said. After that, it's yours. And you? He held the elevator door an instant longer than necessary. He looked at me from the corner, hands in his pockets, with the same frightening calm. I'll try to get there before them. I don't promise in time. I promise I'll arrive. I stepped into the elevator without answering. The door began to close between us, slowly, as if even the steel knew to weigh what it was cutting. Before the final click, he added, "Lower. Don't die, detective. For me, if it comes to that. For yourself, preferably." The door closed. Bear dropped me at the corner of Wabash and Madison at 3:40 in the afternoon. I walked the 2 blocks to the unmarked building of State Internal Affairs, with the leather case pressed against my chest inside my coat, feeling the asphalt, wet with melted snow, creak under my soles. The side entrance, as Lev had indicated, had no camera in the access hallway. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs because the elevator seemed too predictable. Chapter 6. The night the 2 of them stayed. The State Internal Affairs office was in an unmarked building, 3 blocks from downtown. I climbed the 3 flights by stairs, and sat on the 3rd floor, took the internal elevator up to the prosecutor's office. It rose too slowly for my taste. I pressed the leather case against my chest, glasses firm on my face, and counted the floors mentally so as not to count my heartbeats. The smell of old carpet and reheated coffee mingled in the still air of the cabin. Prosecutor Halloran received me without a smile. It was exactly what I needed. A smile, that afternoon, would have made me cry. I placed the dossier on her desk, the money trails, offshore accounts with Victor Kale's signature in the margins, 3 confirmed names within the organized crime division, and the password notebook Nikolai had handed me at the penthouse. Halloran leafed through it in silence, turned 3 pages, stopped at the 4th, and looked at me over her own glasses. The fluorescent light buzzed low above us. Indifferent. Voss. Her voice came out dry. Do you understand what you're handing me? I understand perfectly. Do you understand what will be done to you if a single comma in this folder is wrong? Nothing in there is wrong. She closed the folder. She rested both hands on the cover. Source? Protected. Witness at risk? Me? Still suspended? Suspended? Then we'll file you as a cooperating witness, not as an active agent. Are you willing to testify tomorrow, under protection? I am. She picked up the phone. She said 3 short sentences, without taking her eyes off mine, and when she hung up, I knew the gears had begun to turn somewhere in the central station where Reyes still thought he was in charge. I left the building when the sun was already slanting, the cold cutting the collar of my coat. I should have asked Bear to come pick me up. I didn't. I wanted to walk to the car on my own feet, feel the asphalt, remember that I still had legs that answered. 2 unmarked cars appeared at the end of the street before I reached mine. Instinct came down before thought. I drew the backup gun, threw myself behind a construction container, and the first burst cut the air exactly where I'd been half a second earlier. They forced me, shot by shot, into an abandoned Southside warehouse whose side door was conveniently open. Conveniently, Victor didn't improvise. Inside, the echo of my own breath startled me. Steel beams, tarps, the smell of old oil and rust clinging to my throat. 4 silhouettes moved among the columns, calculated, trained, unhurried. I crouched behind a column, calculating angles. 2 visible exits. Both watched, 3 meters to the next cover. Their footsteps sounded in a trained pattern, one covering the other, with no unnecessary noise. "Lady," a drawling, old-fashioned voice sounded from some corner. "Return the case and the lady goes home. Victor, in person. Old enough to be my grandfather, dangerous enough to have killed my father, old enough, too, not to delegate when my father's name was inside that case. 12 years of surveillance photographs condensed into a silhouette behind a beam, and even in the shadow I recognized the way of tilting his head that appeared in the old photos my father kept in his drawer. The case is already at Internal Affairs," I said, trying to locate his voice by the sound. "You got here too late. The lady thinks handing over paper is enough," he replied, unhurried. "The lady is young. Paper burns. The prosecutor dies. Another prosecutor appears. The lady, too." He laughed, a laugh of bronchitis and contempt. The sound ricocheted off the beams, and I used the echo to map his position. 2nd row of containers, left side, behind one of the shooters covering the flank. "And then the lady will die for nothing." The first shooter appeared at my side. I dropped him with 2 shots to the chest before he finished raising his gun. My hand trembled afterward. Not during. That, perhaps, was my father's greatest lesson without his knowing it. The other 3 advanced in formation. I retreated behind a row of barrels, feeling my back hit the cold metal, calculating the remaining rounds in the backup gun. 5, maybe 6. The second shooter circled to the left. I fired. I missed. I fired again. I hit his shoulder, and he fell to his knees cursing in Russian. The third advanced from the right, and I was already preparing for the worst calculation of my life. Chest exposed, wrong angle, impossible reload in under 4 seconds. When the back door was broken down, Bear came in first, silent as always, devastating as never before. He neutralized the second man in movements that would have seemed choreographed if they weren't lethal. A blow to the neck, a dry shot, a body on the floor before the other realized it. The third turned his gun toward me at the exact instant another silhouette came through the side door. Nikolai. No coat, white shirt, the look of someone who'd driven too fast and calculated too little. He saw me in the third man's line of fire. He hesitated half a second, and in that half second, I saw the decision happen on his face. The simple arithmetic of someone choosing what to lose. He crossed the distance between us in 3 long strides, and when the third shooter fired, it was his shoulder that took the bullet meant for my chest. The sound he made wasn't a scream. It was a contained growl, muffled against his own shoulder. He fell to his knees at my side, his right hand gripping his left shoulder, teeth clenched. Bear finished the third man with a single clean shot, and the fourth, who was advancing from the flank, with another dry shot before he could complete the step. Silence. From the back of the warehouse, I heard the sound of shuffling steps. Victor retreating, limping, with 2 of his men who were left. I saw his silhouette cross the beam of light coming through the back door, and for a second our eyes met across the distance. Old, wounded, in no hurry and no despair. Just the silent confirmation that this didn't end there. "Bear," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "No." Bear looked at me. He looked at Nikolai bleeding on the floor. In a single short gesture, he decided, the boss first. Victor became later. Nikolai became the priority. "A boss," Bear said. And in that word there was more order than question. "Car," Nikolai replied, teeth clenched. I was already at his side, tearing the sleeve of the white shirt, pressing the fabric against the shoulder that was bleeding too much. My right hand steady for the first time in hours. My hands only trembled when there was no one to save. "You're an idiot," I said, low, without looking at his face. "You're alive," he replied, in the same tone. For the second time this week. For now, enough." Bear brought the car to the door. I got in the back with Nikolai, keeping pressure on his shoulder during the 22 minutes to the Gold Coast. He didn't speak on the way. He just watched my face, too long, like someone memorizing an answer he intended to give later. The iron smell of his blood between my fingers was the only perfume of that trip. In the front seat, Bear spoke low on the phone, in clipped Russian, and when we arrived, the private doctor was already waiting at the penthouse. Lev had arranged everything on the road. Everything worked behind the scenes of Nikolai's world, with an efficiency that frightened me on a theoretical level and saved me on every other. The doctor worked on his shoulder in the suite. I stayed outside because Nikolai asked, in a low voice, for me to stay. When the doctor came out, with the shoulder bandaged and formal instructions for Bear, I went to the hallway bathroom. I turned on the tap. The water came out cold first, then hot. I looked at my hands under the stream, his blood between my fingers, under my nails, in the line of the wrist where the watch should have been and wasn't. I scrubbed slowly. There was no hurry. The blood came off more easily than I expected, and more difficultly than I wanted. The marble sink was cold under my wrists. The soap smelled of something citrusy and expensive, and the steam began to fog the edge of the mirror. I looked at the mirror. The glasses were crooked, the bangs wet on my forehead, my eyes red for reasons I hadn't yet named to myself. The woman in the mirror wasn't the impeccable detective from the station. She wasn't the rigid virgin from the elevator. She was a third person, one I had never met before, and who seemed to have been waiting for me for a long time. I turned off the tap. I dried my hands calmly. I left the bathroom. Nikolai was on the living room couch, a new shirt thrown over his shoulders unbuttoned, the white bandage contrasting with the skin of his collarbone. Low light. The fine snow fell again on the other side of the window. He looked at me, and it wasn't the look of someone sizing me up. It was the look of someone recognizing. I sat next to him, not too close, not too far. "I'm tired," I said, after a silence that must have lasted a full minute. "I'm tired of pretending I don't see you. I'm tired of pretending I only see what they write in the reports. I'm tired of pretending that if I want to, I can go back." He didn't answer right away. He kept looking at me like someone memorizing an answer he'd need to carry for the rest of his life. The bandage rose and fell slowly on his chest. "You can't go back. I know. Neither can I." His voice came out hoarse. "I fell for you before I even realized it. Detective." It wasn't the line. It was you still believing, after everything, that it was worth saying a truth out loud. I looked at him. The glasses fogged a little. "You laughed," I said. "I laughed, because I no longer knew what to do with the truth." He sketched a smile at the corner, restrained by the pain in his shoulder. "I still don't know. I'm learning." I moved a centimeter closer. He noticed the centimeter. Men of that type notice everything. "I didn't come here to tell you that I trust you," I said. "I came to tell you that I've decided to get to know you. That's more dangerous." "I know." He raised his left hand, the one on the good side, and touched my face with the backs of his fingers. Cold, careful, lingering. I rested my temple against his hand and closed my eyes for 2 whole seconds. I felt his pulse beat against my cheek, faster than the tone of his voice wanted to let on. When I opened them, he was closer. The kiss was soft, decided, without violence, without urgency, without anything beyond the choice not to pull back anymore. I tasted the faint trace of antiseptic and something that was only his and that I had never tasted before. It was quick. It was enough. He pulled away a millimeter and stayed there, his forehead resting against mine, breathing slowly. "I can't offer you a saint," he said. "And I never asked for a saint. I can offer you a present. I'll take a present." He stood up carefully, holding the bandaged shoulder, and held out his good hand. I looked at his hand for an instant. It was wide, marked by an old cut at the base of the thumb, with the brushed silver ring and the Cyrillic initial I had seen 100 times without ever touching. I took it. We walked down the penthouse hallway unhurried, my steps synchronized with his. The parquet creaked quietly under my bare feet, and the indirect light of the hallway painted the wall a tired amber. The door to the main bedroom was open, and the cold from the open window came in threads. He went in first. I went in after. The door closed behind us with that low sound of heavy wood settling. Outside, the snow kept falling over Chicago. The next morning's light came through the wide window, cold, bluish, the way only Chicago in February can manage. I woke first. I was lying on my side, in his bed, wearing one of his white shirts, open at the first buttons, sensing in the fabric a scent that already seemed familiar to me. I looked at the ceiling for a length of time I didn't measure. The sheet was soft from so many washings, and the silence of the room had that rare quality of not weighing anything. I got up slowly. The glasses were on the nightstand, folded with a care that wasn't mine. I put them on. I walked barefoot to the kitchen, the stone floor frozen under my soles. The coffee maker was still clean. I turned it on. I rested my hands on the counter and looked out the window. The snow had stopped. The sky was that nearly respectful white gray. The smell of coffee began to rise slowly, bitter and domestic at the same time. and it was the first perfume of that morning. Footsteps behind me, slow because of the shoulder. "Good morning," Nikolai said, close enough for his voice to graze the back of my neck. "Good morning." He passed beside me. He took 2 cups. He poured the coffee. He put half a spoon of sugar in mine, stirred slowly, as if he'd known the gesture for a long time. I watched the spoon turn. How do you know?" I asked. "That I take it like this?" "I've been watching you longer than I should have, detective." He brought the cup to his lips without taking his eyes off mine. The sugar was the easiest detail. I leaned my hip against the counter. I took the cup. The warmth passed through both my hands. "And now?" I asked. "Now I offer you coffee." He looked at me over the rim of his own cup. "Then we decide the rest, one day at a time. I'm still a cop. I know. You're still dangerous. I know. So there's no easy promise. There's no easy promise." He took a sip. "There's only this morning, and the next." I took a sip, took 2 steps to the window, and looked outside. The view from there was the whole city in silence, still sleeping under the white, the streets beginning to stir slowly. For a second, just 1 second, I thought of Victor Kale, old, wounded, hidden in some corner the police hadn't yet mapped. I thought of the men who surround themselves with men of that type, and of how they don't disappear with a single dossier handed to a serious prosecutor. I thought the way a cop thinks, without drama, without fear, with the cold precision of someone who already knows the work doesn't end, because a chapter ends. The thought lasted 1 breath. When I turned my eyes back inside the kitchen, Nikolai was leaning against the counter, cup in his good hand, shoulder bandaged, looking at me with that half-smile I had begun to recognize as his way of calling me without saying my name. "What are you thinking about, detective?" I smiled. It wasn't a wide smile. It was the kind that stays more in the eyes than on the mouth, but it was chosen. "I'm thinking about the coffee," I lied, softly. "It's good." He laughed low, a deep, restrained laugh, exactly like the one in that corner of the elevator, that night when I carried a box and let slip a line that changed everything. I took the second sip. He took his. Neither of us said anything more for a good while. Outside, Chicago kept waking up, indifferent. In here, 2 steps apart from each other, 2 identical coffees, a bandaged shoulder and a white shirt that was too big. The 2 of us stayed,